The moment that stopped time. The rain had just begun to fall softly outside the studio gates when Keanu Reeves stepped out of his car. His jacket clung to his shoulders, soaked with quiet dignity, and the lights from the set reflected against the wet pavement like fading stars. Inside, Sandra Bullock waited near the corner of the soundstage, her hands folded together, eyes lowered, lost in a thought she hadn't shared with anyone yet. Something in the air that evening carried a weight neither of them could name. The director called for a short break, giving the crew time to reset for the final scene of the day. Keanu caught sight of Sandra standing alone near the window, her reflection trembling in the glass. He walked toward her slowly, almost hesitantly, like someone approaching a memory. The years they had spent apart since their first film together had softened their bond, but never erased it. Every time they met, there was a stillness in the air that felt both peaceful and painful, as if time itself respected their quiet connection. "You okay?" he asked, his voice low but steady. Sandra turned and smiled faintly, though her eyes betrayed the weight of exhaustion. "Just thinking," she said, "about how fast everything moves. We blink and decades are gone." Keanu nodded. "Yeah, it's strange, isn't it? How people remember moments, not years." She looked at him for a long second before replying. "Some moments stay forever, like they refuse to fade." That line lingered between them like the scent of rain. Keanu didn't answer. Instead, he reached into his pocket and took out a small folded paper, worn at the edges. It was a note Sandra had written him years ago after their first movie. It said, "Thank you for being kind, even when the cameras aren't rolling." He had kept it ever since, quietly, never mentioning it to anyone. She noticed the paper and her eyes widened. "You kept that?" she whispered. "I did," he said simply. "Because kindness matters." "And you meant it." The air grew heavier. The hum of distant equipment faded, and all that remained was the sound of rain tapping the roof above them. Sandra's eyes glistened as she stepped closer, her breath slow and uneven. There was a softness in her expression that words couldn't touch. She wanted to speak, but the emotion caught in her throat. Keanu looked down, unsure of what to say. He had spent his life mastering silence, learning how to hold pain without letting it spill. But this silence was different. It wasn't heavy. It was full of truth. Then, without planning it, without thinking about cameras or time or who might be watching, Keanu leaned forward and pressed a gentle kiss on Sandra's forehead. It wasn't romantic. It wasn't performative. It was pure gratitude. A silent thank you for every moment of understanding, every shared smile, every unspoken comfort. Her eyes closed as if that touch had reached a part of her heart she hadn't opened in years. For a few seconds, the world seemed to stop. Even the rain outside paused, caught in the gravity of their stillness. When he stepped back, neither of them spoke. Sandra's eyes shimmered, not with tears, but with quiet peace. She looked at him and smiled, the kind of smile that forgives time itself. "You always know what to say," she whispered. "That's funny," Keanu replied softly. "Because I didn't say anything." Their laughter broke the silence. But beneath that laughter, something unspoken had shifted, something the cameras could never capture. When they returned to the set, the crew noticed it. There was a tenderness in their eyes, a calm warmth that translated into every movement, every glance, every line. The director called it the most authentic take he had ever seen. But for Keanu and Sandra, it wasn't acting. It was memory breathing. Later that night, as Keanu sat in his quiet apartment overlooking the city, he replayed the moment again and again in his mind. The gentle kiss, the quiet stillness, the peace in her eyes. He had lived through pain, loss, and loneliness. Yet that small act, a simple gesture of respect and affection, felt more healing than any word ever spoken to him. His phone buzzed with notifications, social media posts exploding after a behind-the-scenes photo leaked of the moment they shared. Fans around the world called it the most beautiful thing they had ever seen. Hashtags trended. Comments filled with emotion poured in. People said the picture made them believe in kindness again. But Keanu didn't read them. He sat in silence, gazing out at the city lights, holding the same paper note between his fingers. He thought of Sandra's words earlier. Some moments stay forever. He finally understood. That night, The internet saw a kiss, but Keanu Reeves felt something deeper. The quiet reminder that even the smallest act of human connection can heal years of unseen wounds. And somewhere, alone in her apartment, Sandra Bullock looked at her reflection and whispered to herself, "Some people never stop being kind." But the next morning, when Keanu received a message from Sandra, everything changed again. Her message said only 3 words: "We need to talk." The moment he read it, a chill went through him. Something in her tone didn't sound right. And that's where everything began to unravel. The message that changed everything. The morning light crept through the half-open blinds of Keanu's apartment. The city outside was waking up slowly, but his mind was already racing. Sandra's message glowed on his phone screen like a whisper he couldn't escape. "We need to talk." 3 simple words, but they carried a strange heaviness that refused to fade. He had read them a dozen times, each time hoping they might sound different. Maybe it was nothing serious. Maybe she just wanted to talk about the scene or the photo that had gone viral overnight. But somewhere deep inside, he knew it wasn't about the internet. Her tone had been too quiet, too deliberate. He could feel the weight of something unspoken hiding between the words. He took a deep breath, ran a hand through his hair, and called her. She didn't answer. He sent a short reply. "I'm here if you need me." No response came back. Hours passed. He tried to distract himself, made coffee, fed the stray cat that sometimes slept on his porch, turned on some music, but every sound in the room felt distant, as if time itself had slowed. He couldn't stop thinking about her face from last night, the tired eyes, the half-smile, the quiet sorrow she tried to hide. By evening, he decided he couldn't wait anymore. He got in his car and drove across the city toward Sandra's home. The sky had turned a dusky orange, the kind of sunset that paints the world in fading gold. He didn't know what he was going to say. He just knew he had to see her. When he arrived, the front door was slightly open. That wasn't like her. She was always careful, always composed. He hesitated for a moment, then gently pushed the door open. The house was quiet. "Too quiet, Sandra?" he called out softly. No answer. He stepped inside. The faint smell of coffee filled the air, mixed with the scent of rain from the open window. On the living room table lay a few papers, a cup of tea gone cold, and a framed photo of them from their first movie together. Next to it was her phone, the screen dim but blinking faintly with unread messages. Then he heard it. A faint sound from the next room. Not a cry, not a shout, just a quiet sigh. He walked toward the sound and found her sitting on the floor, her back against the wall, eyes closed, breathing deeply as if fighting to steady herself. When she saw him, she didn't look surprised, almost like she had known he would come. "You didn't have to," she said softly, her voice trembling. "You sent a message," he replied. "And you sounded like you needed someone." She smiled faintly, but her eyes filled with something raw and vulnerable. "I didn't know who else to call." Keanu sat beside her, the space between them filled with quiet understanding. He didn't ask what was wrong. He just waited, giving her the silence she needed to find her words. After a long pause, she finally spoke. "The doctors called me this morning." His heart skipped. "And," she took a shaky breath, "they found something. Nothing confirmed yet, but they want to run more tests." The room seemed to lose air for a moment. Keanu's chest tightened, his throat dry. He didn't move, didn't know how to react. She wasn't crying, but her hands trembled slightly as she clasped them together. "They said it might be early, maybe treatable," she continued. "But I don't want to panic. I just needed to tell someone who wouldn't treat me like I'm breaking." He looked at her then, really looked, at the woman who had spent her life making others laugh, comforting everyone else, always smiling, always strong. Now, behind that strength, there was fear she couldn't hide. "You're not breaking," he said softly. "You're human, and you're not alone." She let out a breath that turned into a small laugh, half relieved, half tired. "You always say the right thing," she murmured. "Not really," he said. "I just mean it." They sat there in silence for a long time, the kind of silence that heals more than words ever could. Outside, the rain began again, tapping gently against the windows. Keanu reached for her hand, not as a gesture of comfort, but as a quiet promise. She didn't pull away. "You don't have to do this alone," he said. "Whatever happens, I'm here." The silence before the storm the night was calm, but inside Keanu Reeves' heart, there was a storm he could not explain. He sat alone in his quiet apartment overlooking Los Angeles, the city lights flickering like tiny reminders of memories he could never erase. His phone buzzed once, lighting up the dark room. It was a message from Sandra Bullock. 3 simple words that froze him in place: "I need you." For a moment, Keanu stared at the screen, uncertain if it was real. It had been years since they had last spoken beyond polite messages. Years since the warmth of their friendship had been replaced by the silence of distance. Yet here she was, reaching out on a random Thursday night, her message trembling with emotion. He felt something stir inside, a quiet ache, a sense of unfinished story, a call from the past. He grabbed his jacket and left without a word. The elevator hummed softly as it descended, each floor passing like the slow heartbeat of someone walking toward fate. Outside, the air was cool and restless, carrying the scent of rain that hadn't yet fallen. As he started his motorcycle, he felt the weight of memories, of laughter shared between takes, of her soft smile after a long day on set, of that one moment years ago when he almost told her how much she meant to him but didn't. Sandra's house was dimly lit when he arrived. He knocked once, twice, and before he could call out, the door opened. She stood there barefoot, her hair slightly messy, her eyes red from tears. It wasn't the glamorous actress the world adored. It was just Sandra, vulnerable, human, and hurting. Keanu didn't speak. He didn't need to. She stepped forward and hugged him as if she had been holding her breath for years and finally found air. Her voice was quiet, trembling. "My mother's letter came today," she said, her hands still clutching his jacket. "She wrote it before she passed, and I never read it. I couldn't, until tonight." Keanu guided her to the couch, sitting beside her as she unfolded an old, worn-out envelope. The paper trembled in her hands. She read aloud in a broken whisper, and as she did, tears streamed down her cheeks. Her mother's words were gentle, wise, and full of love, reminding her to forgive, to live freely, and to hold on to those who truly see her soul. When she finished, silence filled the room. Keanu didn't try to fix her pain or offer empty comfort. He simply placed his hand over hers, steady and warm. He understood that sometimes the kindest thing you can do for someone is just to be there. After a long pause, she looked up at him, her eyes glistening. "You've always been there for everyone, Keanu, but who's there for you?" He hesitated. That question hit deeper than she knew. For years, he had carried the loss of his loved ones, the loneliness of fame, and the quiet exhaustion of being strong for others. He smiled softly, not because he was fine, but because he didn't know how else to respond. "Maybe being there for others keeps me from falling apart," he said. Her laughter came faintly through tears. "You always say things like that, things that hurt but heal at the same time." The night grew quieter, and the rain finally began to fall, tapping softly on the windows. Sandra leaned back, her head resting near his shoulder, the weight of sorrow slowly melting into something gentle. A calm shared between two souls who had seen too much of the world. Keanu looked at her, the woman who had once changed the meaning of friendship in his life. Her eyelids were heavy, her breathing slow, and for the first time in years, she looked peaceful. He brushed a loose strand of hair from her forehead. Something inside him shifted, not passion, not impulse, but deep respect and tenderness. He leaned forward and pressed a gentle kiss on her forehead. It was a quiet gesture, one that said everything words could not. It was love in its purest form, selfless, calm, and sacred. Outside, the city lights flickered through the rain, painting moving patterns across the walls. The world felt distant, as if time itself paused to witness the moment. Sandra stirred slightly, half asleep, and whispered, "Thank you, Keanu." But before he could answer, his phone buzzed again. A name appeared on the screen, one that made his heart skip. It was a private number, followed by a short message. "They know about you. Don't come to the studio tomorrow." His fingers froze. Confusion clouded his thoughts. He glanced at Sandra, peacefully asleep, unaware of the storm that was about to begin. Something deep within him sensed that his life was about to change forever, and not in the way he expected. As the night deepened, Keanu stared at the message, his reflection faint in the dark window. The rain blurred the city below, and in that quiet chaos, a strange unease settled in his chest. Somewhere between love, loyalty, and fear, a new chapter was waiting to unfold. And it all began with a kiss. Shadows behind the light, the morning sun crept slowly through the blinds, painting pale gold across the walls of Sandra's living room. Keanu had not slept. He sat by the window, his eyes fixed on the same message that had kept him awake all night. "They know about you. Don't come to the studio tomorrow." He read it over and over, hoping it would somehow change its meaning. But it didn't. It was real, and it carried a weight that made his chest tighten. He looked at Sandra, still asleep on the couch. There was peace on her face now, the kind of fragile peace that comes after a storm of tears. He didn't want to wake her, but he knew he had to leave soon. Something about that message felt urgent, like a whisper from danger. He quietly folded a blanket over her shoulders, then slipped out into the morning air. The city was loud again, cars honking, voices rising, life rushing on as if nothing had changed. But inside him, everything had shifted. He couldn't stop thinking about who had sent that message. Was it a prank, a threat, or something deeper, something connected to the project he had just finished? The documentary about mental health and fame that had stirred uncomfortable truths in Hollywood circles. As he reached his motorcycle, he noticed a black SUV parked a few meters away. Its windows were tinted, and though no one moved inside, Keanu felt watched. He took a slow breath, forcing calm into his veins, then drove off toward the studio anyway. He had always believed in facing what scared him, not running from it. The studio lot looked normal at first: security guards, film trailers, coffee carts, laughter. But when he parked, he noticed the unusual quiet around his dressing room. The door was slightly open. Inside, papers were scattered across the table, the script torn in half. Someone had been there. His assistant, Lily, appeared behind him, pale and nervous. "Keanu," she said softly, "someone broke in last night." Security said the cameras glitched for 20 minutes. "Did they take anything?" "No," she replied, "but someone left this." She handed him a small envelope. Inside was a single Polaroid photo, him and Sandra together, taken years ago on the set of the lake house. On the back, a message was written in bold black ink: "The past isn't as quiet as you think." His heart sank. This wasn't about the new project, this was personal. For the rest of the day, he went through the motions of filming, his mind elsewhere. Every line he spoke felt hollow, every smile forced. Between takes, he caught glimpses of strangers near the lot, faces that disappeared when he tried to look twice. Something was unraveling, and he didn't yet understand what. That evening, he returned to Sandra's place. She was sitting on the porch, wrapped in a sweater, her eyes soft but searching. "You left without saying goodbye," she said gently. "I didn't want to wake you," he answered. "You needed rest." She nodded but could sense something heavier in his voice. "Something happened, didn't it?" He hesitated, then showed her the photo. Her face changed immediately, confusion, then fear. "Where did you get this?" "Someone left it in my room," he said, "and they sent me a message last night." She looked down, whispering, "This can't be happening again." The word again caught his attention. "What do you mean again, Sandra?" She didn't answer right away. Her hands trembled slightly. "When we were filming the lake house, I used to get strange letters. Someone claimed to know every place I went, everything I did. I thought it was just a fan, but one night, someone tried to break into my trailer. I never told anyone except my mother. And now you're getting messages like that?" The air grew heavier. The soft glow of sunset couldn't hide the dread crawling between them. Keanu felt protective instinct rise within him, not as a celebrity protecting another, but as a friend who refused to let fear win. "You should stay with me tonight," he said quietly. She looked at him, her eyes filled with something between fear and gratitude. "Keanu, what if whoever this is doesn't want us together again?" "Then they'll have to face both of us," he said firmly. "Because I'm not running." That night, they drove to his home in the hills. The city below shimmered with light, unaware of the silent storm brewing between two old souls who had once been just co-stars, now bound by something deeper, shared danger, old affection, and unspoken truths. Inside his home, Keanu made tea while Sandra sat by the fire. "You always make it look easy," she said softly, watching him move with calm precision. "Even when you're scared." He smiled faintly. "Maybe that's my trick. I just act calm until I start believing it." She laughed a little, and for a fleeting moment the warmth returned. But then a loud thud echoed from outside, sharp, deliberate, not the wind. Keanu set down his cup, his eyes narrowing. Another sound followed, footsteps on gravel. He signaled her to stay quiet and moved toward the door. When he opened it, no one was there. Only the faint hum of the night and an envelope taped to the front gate. He retrieved it carefully, his heartbeat loud in his chest. Inside was a single note. "You can't hide from what you left behind." He looked out into the dark road, but there was nothing, only shadows stretching long and thin under the streetlights. As he turned back, Sandra stood behind him, fear clear in her eyes. "Keanu," she whispered, "this isn't random. Someone's trying to bring something back." "Bring what back?" he asked. She looked down, almost as if ashamed. "The truth about that night in Chicago." Keanu froze. That night. The one they both promised never to speak about again. The fire flickered behind them, and the night grew still, as if waiting for their next move. Whatever this was, it wasn't over. And Keanu knew the silence before the storm was ending. The night in Chicago, the wind howled softly against the tall windows as Keanu sat in silence, his thoughts spiraling back to a memory he had buried deep within. Sandra sat across from him, her eyes glistening with the weight of something long kept inside. Neither of them spoke for a while. The only sound was the faint ticking of the clock, counting down the seconds until one of them finally broke the silence. Keanu leaned forward, his voice low and steady. "What do you mean, the truth about that night in Chicago?" Sandra took a shaky breath, her fingers tracing the edge of her cup. "You remember the charity event," she whispered. "The one we attended after the awards ceremony." He nodded slowly. "The one at the Lakeside Theater. Yeah, I remember. It was freezing that night. And crowded," she said softly. "Too many faces, too many cameras. We both thought it was just another event. But something happened after we left, Keanu. Something the world never knew." Her words sent a chill through the room. He tried to recall every moment of that evening. The laughter, the flashing lights, the drive back to the hotel, and then, yes, a scream, a crash, the image of a man stumbling into the road, the flash of headlights. He had spent years trying to forget. "He didn't die," Sandra said, breaking the silence. "But he disappeared. And someone covered it up." Keanu's breath caught. "Covered it up? Who?" She shook her head slowly. "I don't know. My mother was the one who told me to stay quiet. She said someone powerful wanted the story buried. I never knew who, but I always feared that one day it would come back." Keanu stood, pacing the room. Memories collided with reality, fragments of that night, the guilt that followed, the news reports that never mentioned the accident. "And now someone's sending these messages," he murmured. "They know, Sandra. Whoever they are, they know." She nodded quietly. "And they want us to remember." For a long time, they just stood there, the weight of the past pressing between them. The fire crackled softly, throwing warm light on their faces, faces that had seen too much, carried too much. Sandra finally spoke again. "Maybe we shouldn't run this time, Keanu. Maybe it's time to face it." He looked at her, truly looked, not as a friend, not as a co-star, but as someone who had carried the same pain he had. "You really think we can fix something that happened so long ago?" "Not fix it," she said, "but make peace with it." Keanu nodded slowly. "Then we start tomorrow." But peace was not what waited for them the next morning. The day began like any other, with the hum of the city and the soft glow of sunlight spilling through clouds. Keanu received another message just after sunrise. This time it wasn't words, it was a photo. A current one. Him and Sandra sitting in his living room the night before. The caption read, "You can't hide guilt behind kindness." His chest tightened. Someone had been watching them close enough to take that photo. He immediately checked the windows, the doors, the security cameras. The footage showed nothing, static for 5 full minutes around midnight. Sandra appeared in the hallway, still in her robe, sensing something was wrong. "Another message?" she asked quietly. He nodded, showing her the phone. Her face paled. "This is getting worse." Keanu clenched his jaw. "They're trying to break us. But I'm not giving them that satisfaction." They spent the morning retracing everything about that night in Chicago. Old calls, names, news archives. The man they'd seen, Michael Harper, was a journalist, known for investigating corruption in the film industry. A week after the accident, he had vanished completely. No police report, no investigation, nothing. It was as if he had never existed. By afternoon, Sandra's expression grew grave. "Keanu," she said quietly, "what if the people who silenced him are the ones sending these messages? What if this isn't revenge, but a warning?" He didn't answer. Instead, he stared out the window, lost in thought. "If that's true, then someone doesn't just want to expose the past, they want to make sure we stay quiet forever." As night fell, the tension in the house thickened. The air felt heavy, as if holding its breath. Keanu double-checked the locks and drew the curtains. Sandra tried to rest, but her mind wouldn't stop racing. Every creak, every rustle made her flinch. Around midnight, a noise echoed from outside again, not soft this time, but sharp, deliberate. Keanu grabbed a flashlight and stepped out onto the porch. His breath misted in the cold air. He scanned the darkness, the beam cutting through mist and shadow. Something glimmered near the gate, another envelope. He approached slowly, each step echoing in the quiet night. When he opened it, his pulse quickened. Inside was a single photograph, this time of Michael Harper, alive. or at least that's what it seemed. The photo was recent, dated just 2 days ago. Behind him, Sandra's voice trembled. "What is it?" He turned, holding out the photo. "He's alive," he whispered, her eyes widened. "That's impossible." "Unless," Keanu said, his voice low, "someone made it look like he disappeared." They stood in stunned silence, the sound of the wind rising around them. For years they had carried guilt over a man they thought they had hurt. But now a new question emerged: who had made them believe that lie, and why? As Keanu looked at the photo again, he noticed something odd in the background. Behind Michael stood a building, one Keanu recognized instantly. It was an old studio on the outskirts of Lowe's Angels, abandoned years ago after a fire. He felt his heart pound. "That's where he is," he said firmly. "And that's where we're going." Sandra looked at him with fear and determination. "You really think he's waiting for us?" Keanu nodded slowly, his voice steady. "No one sends messages like this unless they want to be found." The night deepened around them, the lights of the city distant and cold. As they prepared to leave, Keanu glanced at Sandra one last time, knowing that whatever truth waited in that building would change both their lives forever. The past had returned, not as a ghost, but as a test, and the only way to silence it was to face it. The echoes of truth. The road leading to the old studio was empty, lined with tall, dying trees whose shadows stretched across the cracked pavement like black veins. The world seemed to hold its breath as Keanu and Sandra drove in silence, the hum of the engine filling the air between them. Both knew that what waited at the end of the road could destroy everything they had built, yet neither turned back. The studio came into view, a vast, burned-out structure with its metal gates rusted, and its sign barely readable under years of dust. Keanu parked a few feet away, leaving the engine running just in case. The air was colder here, carrying the scent of ash and something faintly metallic. "Are you sure about this?" Sandra whispered, her voice almost lost to the wind. Keanu nodded slowly. "We need to know what really happened. No more hiding." They entered through a side door that hung loosely on its hinges. Inside, the floor was covered with shattered glass and debris. Each step echoed through the hollow building, their flashlights cutting through the darkness in thin beams. Then from deep inside, a voice called out, soft, raspy, but unmistakably human. "You came!" Sandra froze. Keanu raised his light, sweeping across the vast, empty space until it landed on a figure standing near the old film projector. The man was older now, his beard unkempt, his clothes dusty, but his eyes alive, sharp, haunted, and knowing. "Michael Harper," Keanu said, his voice steady. The man smiled faintly. "I wondered how long it would take you to come." Sandra stepped forward, her voice trembling. "We thought you were dead." "That was the plan," Michael said. "Someone wanted me gone, and you two to believe it. Easier that way." "Who?" Keanu asked sharply. Michael didn't answer immediately. Instead, he limped toward a dusty table covered with old folders and tapes. "You remember the charity event," he said. "I wasn't there by accident. I was following a lead, something big. A story that involved people at the top of Hollywood, people who used their power to silence anyone who spoke the truth." He opened a folder, revealing a photo of several men in suits, producers, executives, and politicians Keanu vaguely recognized from the industry. "That night you two left just before the explosion," Michael said. "Someone planted it to erase evidence, and they used your presence there to shift suspicion. They sent me fake leads afterward, then staged my disappearance to keep you quiet." Sandra's eyes widened. "So all these years we blamed ourselves for nothing?" Michael nodded grimly. "They needed you to stay silent, and guilt is the best silencer." Keanu's hands clenched into fists. "Who's behind it now? Who's sending those messages?" Michael looked up, his expression hollow. "The same people. They're cleaning up what's left of the story, and now that you've come here, they'll know." The moment the words left his mouth, a sound echoed through the hallway: footsteps. Not one pair, but several. Keanu turned off his flashlight instantly, pulling Sandra behind a broken wall. The footsteps grew closer, steady and purposeful. Michael backed away, whispering, "You shouldn't have come." 3 shadows entered the room, carrying flashlights and speaking in low tones. One of them shone a light across the floor, stopping at the footprints they had left in the dust. "They're here," a voice said. Keanu motioned for Sandra to stay quiet. His heartbeat pounded in his ears as the men began to spread out. Michael slipped them a small USB drive, his hand trembling. "Everything's on this," he whispered. "Proof, names, all of it. Get it out before they find you." Keanu took it, slipping it into his jacket just as a beam of light hit them. "There," someone shouted. The next few seconds blurred into chaos, shouting, running, the sound of glass breaking. Keanu grabbed Sandra's hand and pulled her toward a side exit. Behind them, Michael yelled, "Go! Don't stop!" before a deafening crash filled the air. They burst out into the night, sprinting toward the car. The wind howled through the empty lot as Keanu started the engine, tires screeching against the gravel. In the rearview mirror, flames began to rise from the building, lighting up the night sky like a warning. Sandra looked back, her face pale. "Michael," Keanu's voice broke. He knew what he was doing. "He gave us a chance." For miles, neither spoke. The city lights finally came into view, distant and unreal. Sandra leaned against the window, her voice trembling. "We have proof, Keanu. But what do we do with it?" He glanced at her, his jaw tight. "We do what's right, no more silence." She turned toward him, her eyes filled with both fear and admiration. "You always say that like it's easy." "It's not," he said quietly. "But maybe it's the only way to be free." As they drove, a sudden buzz came from his phone again. Another message flashed on the screen. This one had no words, only a short video clip. It showed Michael, moments before the explosion, looking directly into the camera and saying, "If you're seeing this, they know everything." Keanu felt the blood drain from his face. Sandra looked at him, her voice barely a whisper. "What does that mean?" He looked out at the dark road ahead, headlights cutting through the fog. "It means," he said softly, "this isn't over. It's only beginning." The USB drive felt heavy in his pocket, not just with secrets, but with the weight of truth that could destroy powerful lives. Somewhere behind them, sirens wailed faintly in the distance. But ahead lay only darkness, uncertainty, and the fragile bond between two people who had once been broken by silence. And somewhere deep inside, Keanu knew. The moment he kissed Sandra's forehead, that night had set something in motion far greater than either of them understood. She turned to him slowly, eyes shining with gratitude and sadness. "Don't promise me things you can't keep, Keanu." "Then I won't promise," he said quietly. "I'll just be here." That made her smile, one of those soft, genuine smiles that felt like sunrise. She rested her head against his shoulder, and for a while neither of them spoke. As the evening light faded, Keanu realized how fragile everything truly was. Fame, success, applause, none of it meant anything when someone you cared about was hurting. In that moment, all that mattered was presence, just being there. Hours later, as he drove home through the empty streets, he thought about her words again. They found something. He didn't know what that meant yet. He didn't know how bad it was, but he knew one thing for certain. He wasn't going to let her face it alone. When he reached home, he found a single missed call from a private number. He called back, but no one answered. A few seconds later, a voicemail arrived. It was from Sandra's assistant. Her voice sounded urgent. "Mr. Reeves, I don't know if you've spoken to Sandra tonight, but she didn't show up for her late appointment. If you know where she is, please call me. Something seems off." Keanu's pulse quickened. He immediately dialed Sandra's number, but it went straight to voicemail. He tried again. Nothing. He stood in the dark living room, the sound of rain pounding against the glass, a sense of dread creeping up his spine. He grabbed his keys and turned toward the door again. Somewhere deep inside, a quiet voice whispered that this was only the beginning, and whatever lay ahead, it was going to test every ounce of strength he had left. The silence before the storm. The streets were nearly empty when Keanu drove back toward Sandra's house. The rain had stopped, leaving behind a mist that hovered low over the asphalt. The city lights shimmered through the haze, but everything felt distant, unreal, as if he were driving through a memory instead of a night. Sandra's phone still went straight to voicemail. His mind replayed every word she had said, every tremor in her voice, searching for some hidden meaning he might have missed. When he reached her house again, the front gate was still unlocked. He parked hastily and stepped out, his shoes crunching against the wet gravel. The door, which he had left closed earlier, was now slightly ajar again. A faint draft whispered through the hallway. "Sandra?" he called out, his voice echoing into the stillness. No answer. He stepped inside, careful not to disturb anything. The house looked exactly as it had before. Same teacup, same papers on the table, but there was something different in the air. A coldness, an absence. He noticed her phone was gone now. So was her car key from the hook near the door. He walked slowly through the rooms, his heart pounding louder with every step. The silence pressed against him like a heavy fog. When he reached the back patio, he saw faint footprints on the wet tiles, leading toward the small garden gate. He followed them outside. The footprints stopped near the end of the path, right by the small bench they used to sit on during breaks between film shoots at her house. He remembered those moments, the quiet laughter, the stories, the shared peace. But tonight the bench was empty except for a folded note resting on its wooden surface. His hands trembled slightly as he picked it up. The note read, "Don't worry, I just need some time. Please trust me." She stood there under the faint glow of the garden light, his breath visible in the cool air. "Time," he whispered to himself. She said she needed time. But time for what? To think? To heal? To hide? His instincts told him something was wrong. Sandra wasn't the kind of person who vanished without saying where she was going, not to the people she trusted. And right now, she trusted only him. He sat on the bench, clutching the note, trying to calm his thoughts. He remembered how fragile her voice had sounded when she mentioned the doctors. Maybe she had gone to the hospital on her own. Maybe she didn't want him to see her afraid. He decided to check the clinic she had mentioned once before, the private facility near Malibu she trusted for her tests. He started the car and drove there, his mind spiraling with questions and worst-case scenarios. The radio played softly, but he barely heard it. His thoughts were louder than the music. When he reached the clinic, the parking lot was nearly empty. The receptionist looked up as he entered, surprised to see anyone at that hour. "Hi," he said quietly. "I'm looking for Sandra Bullock. She might have come here tonight." The receptionist frowned, checking the system. After a moment, she shook her head. "I'm sorry, sir, there's no record of her checking in today." "Are you sure?" he asked, his voice tight. "She was supposed to have a late appointment." "We don't have any appointments scheduled under that name tonight," the woman replied kindly. "Maybe another branch?" Keanu nodded absently, though his stomach sank. He thanked her and walked back out to the car. As he stood by the door, his phone buzzed. It was a text message from an unknown number. It said only one line, "If you care about her, stop looking." He froze. The air around him turned colder. The number was untraceable, just digits with no name. His instincts sharpened instantly. This wasn't just about her needing space. Something deeper, darker was happening. He immediately dialed the number back, but it didn't connect. He tried again. Disconnected. Whoever had sent that message didn't want to be found. He sat in the driver's seat for a long moment, gripping the steering wheel tightly. Part of him wanted to believe it was some cruel prank, but another part, his intuition, the one that had always guided him quietly through life, told him it wasn't. This was real, and it was personal. He drove aimlessly for an hour, scanning every thought, every detail of the last 24 hours. The message, the open door, the missing phone. It all felt deliberate. Someone wanted to keep her hidden or silence her. He finally pulled over near a quiet overlook above the ocean. The waves below crashed against the rocks in slow rhythm, steady and endless. He stepped out of the car and stared at the horizon, trying to make sense of the chaos. The sound of the ocean reminded him of something Sandra once said during an interview years ago. "When life gets too loud, I go to the water. It's the only place that listens." His chest tightened. If that still meant something to her, he knew where she might have gone. He got back in the car and headed toward the coastline road that led to her old beach house, the one she rarely visited anymore, the one she once called her quiet place. As he drove, lightning flashed far out at sea, illuminating the clouds. Rain began again, soft at first, then heavier, but he didn't slow down. When he reached the beach house, it was dark except for a faint light flickering from inside. His pulse quickened. He parked, got out, and approached the front door. The wind howled through the dunes, carrying the scent of salt and rain. He tried the handle. It was unlocked. He pushed the door open slowly. Inside, candles flickered on a small table near the window. Sandra was sitting there, wrapped in a blanket, staring out at the waves. When she turned to look at him, her eyes were red but calm, as if she had been crying for hours and run out of tears. "You found me," she said quietly. There was no surprise in her voice. "You left a note," he replied, "and someone texted me. They told me to stop looking." She looked down, her hands tightening around the blanket. "I know," she said. "That's why I came here. To protect you." He frowned, stepping closer. "Protect me?" From what? She hesitated, her lips trembling. There's something I didn't tell you yesterday. Something about the tests. His heart began to race again. What about them? She took a deep breath, her voice barely above a whisper. It wasn't just a random checkup. I've been keeping it quiet for months. The doctors think what they found might not be natural. They're investigating something strange. Keanu stared at her, confused. Strange? What do you mean? They said it might be linked to a chemical exposure from an old movie set. Years ago, the studio buried it. They told me not to talk. And when I asked questions, people started disappearing. The room fell silent except for the waves crashing outside. Keanu felt his chest tighten, the full weight of what she was saying sinking in. So, you think someone's watching you? He asked quietly. She nodded slowly. And now they know you're involved. A long silence followed. The storm outside grew louder, as if echoing the storm inside both of them. Keanu looked at her, his voice steady but filled with quiet determination. Then they'll have to go through me first. Her eyes filled with tears again, not from fear, but from the strange comfort of knowing he meant every word. But neither of them knew that someone was already watching them from a car parked down the beach road, its engine running quietly, headlights off. A figure inside the car lifted a phone and took a picture through the window, the candlelight flickering across their faces. Then the car slowly drove away into the rain. The chase for truth, the morning sun, broke through heavy clouds, but its light felt hollow, pale, uncertain. Keanu drove through the twisting mountain roads, his hands tight on the steering wheel. Beside him, Sandra sat silent, clutching the USB drive like a lifeline. Neither had spoken since they left the burning studio. The radio was off, the air thick with tension and the faint smell of smoke clinging to their clothes. When the city skyline finally appeared in the distance, Keanu slowed the car, pulling over by a quiet overlook. The valley below shimmered with morning haze, yet it felt like another world, one far away from the chaos chasing them. He leaned forward, resting his arms on the steering wheel. "We can't go to the police," he said quietly. "Whoever's behind this has people everywhere." Sandra looked down at the USB in her hand. "Then where do we go?" He hesitated. "There's someone I trust, an old journalist named Clara. She used to work with Michael before she retired. If anyone can get this out safely, it's her." "Will she help?" "She will," he said, though even he wasn't sure. They set off again, driving toward the coast where Clara lived. The road wound along cliffs overlooking the restless ocean, waves crashing against dark rocks below. The sound was strangely comforting, nature's reminder that no secret, no lie lasts forever. As they neared a small seaside town, Sandra spoke softly, almost to herself. "Do you ever wonder, Keanu, if all this kindness you show the world is just your way of hiding pain?" He glanced at her, surprised. "Maybe. But I think kindness is the only thing that keeps me from becoming what I hate." She smiled faintly, eyes glistening. "You're still the same person I met years ago. Gentle, quiet, trying to fix everyone but yourself." He wanted to reply, but words failed. Instead, he reached over, his hand brushing hers. She didn't pull away. For a brief second, the chaos outside seemed far away. They reached Clara's cottage by noon. It was small, surrounded by wildflowers, with the ocean stretching endlessly beyond. Clara opened the door before they could knock, a woman in her 60s, sharp-eyed and steady. "I've been expecting you," she said. "Michael called me 2 nights ago." Sandra's breath caught. "He knew this would happen," Clara nodded. "He said if anything went wrong, you'd come." Inside, the air smelled of salt and old books. Keanu handed her the USB, explaining everything, the messages, the studio, the fire. Clara listened quietly, her expression growing darker. When he finished, she plugged the drive into her laptop. Lines of code and folders appeared on the screen. "This," she whispered, "this is bigger than I thought." Sandra leaned closer. "What's on it?" Clara opened a folder labeled Project Aurelia. Inside were hundreds of documents, emails, and recordings linking powerful producers, financiers, and public figures in a massive cover-up. Not just about Michael, but about manipulated charity funds, exploitation, and silencing of whistleblowers. "They built careers on lies," Clara said, "and Michael was about to expose it all." Keanu stared at the screen, anger mixing with disbelief. "And they used us, our names, our silence, to bury it." "Yes," Clara said softly. "You were the perfect distraction, famous, respected, too kind to suspect anything." Sandra's voice broke. "So all this time our guilt wasn't real, it was designed." Clara nodded, eyes steady. And now they'll do anything to make sure the truth never comes out. Before Keanu could respond, Clara's landline rang. She frowned, answering cautiously. After a few seconds, her face drained of color. "They found you," she whispered, hanging up. "You have to go, now." Outside, engines roared, black vehicles speeding down the narrow coastal road. Keanu grabbed Sandra's hand and bolted toward the back door. Clara handed him a small silver key. "There's an old storage unit near the pier," she said urgently. "Inside is another copy. Take it. It's encrypted. If you get caught, destroy the original." Keanu's eyes met hers for a brief, silent thank you. Then he and Sandra ran. The wind howled as they reached the rocky path toward the pier. Bullets cracked through the air, hitting wood and stone. Sandra stumbled, but Keanu caught her, pulling her behind a fishing boat. "Keep your head down," he shouted. They ran again, dodging between crates and nets until they reached the storage shed. Inside, dust filled the air, thick and suffocating. Keanu searched frantically, finally spotting an old metal locker. The key fit perfectly. Inside was a small hard drive wrapped in cloth, the second copy, but before they could leave, footsteps echoed outside. Sandra's eyes widened. "They're here." Keanu looked around, scanning for an escape. Then he noticed a trapdoor near the corner, half buried under boxes. He pried it open, a narrow tunnel leading toward the cliffside. "Come on," he said, taking her hand again. They crawled through the tunnel, the sound of voices growing fainter behind them. It opened onto a ledge overlooking the ocean, waves crashing violently below. Sandra gasped for air, clutching the hard drive to her chest. "We can't keep running forever," she said breathlessly. "What if they find us again?" Keanu looked at her, his expression soft but firm. "Then we make them stop chasing, not by fighting, by showing the world the truth." She nodded slowly, eyes glistening. "You still believe people care enough to listen?" He smiled faintly. "I believe some still do." For a moment the world seemed to stand still, the ocean roaring beneath them, the wind tugging at their clothes, and the shared heartbeat of two people who had faced too much and still refused to give up. Keanu reached up, brushing away a tear that had escaped down Sandra's cheek. "We'll finish what Michael started," he said quietly. "No more silence, no more hiding." She took a deep breath, her fingers tightening around his. "Together," she whispered. The sun broke through the clouds, casting light across the restless sea. It felt like a promise, fragile, fleeting, but real. Yet somewhere behind them, in the shadows of power, the people they were running from were already planning their next move. And Keanu knew, deep down, that before this was over, they would have to choose their safety or the truth. The light returns the next night fell heavy and silent over the coast. Waves beat endlessly against the cliffs, their rhythm like the pulse of time itself, unstoppable, indifferent, ancient. Keanu and Sandra sat on a small bench near an abandoned lighthouse, the hard drive between them. A single lantern glowed beside their feet, casting trembling light across their faces. Exhaustion hung over them like a fog. They hadn't eaten, hadn't slept. Their minds were sharp with fear, but steady with purpose. This was the end of running. Whatever came next, they would face it together. Sandra broke the silence first. "What if we release this and they come after us harder?" Keanu looked at her, calm but certain. "Then we'll face it. Truth doesn't destroy you, Sandra. Hiding from it does." She studied him for a moment, eyes searching his face. "You always make it sound simple." "It's not," he said softly. "But doing the right thing never is." A gust of wind blew through, scattering sand across their shoes. In the distance, lights shimmered faintly, the town below still alive, still unaware of the storm above it. Clara had managed to contact an independent news network before disappearing into hiding. She sent Keanu one final message an hour ago: upload it before dawn. Once it's out, there's no going back. He turned the hard drive in his hand, the cold metal pressing against his skin. It held proof of greed, corruption, and lies, but also something deeper. It held freedom. Freedom from guilt, from fear, from years of silence that had haunted them both. "You ready?" he asked quietly. Sandra nodded. "Let's finish this." They connected the drive to an old laptop powered by a car battery. The file list filled the screen again. Emails, contracts, video recordings, everything Michael had risked his life for. Keanu uploaded it to multiple encrypted networks, sending it to every news outlet, watchdog, and public database he could reach. Each percentage ticked upward like the countdown to a new beginning. Then halfway through, the connection froze. Sandra frowned. "What happened?" Keanu checked the signal. "Someone's trying to block it." "They found us." Headlights cut through the darkness from down the hill, two black vehicles speeding toward the lighthouse. Sandra's heartbeat quickened. "Keanu, we have to move." He looked at the progress bar, 83%. Almost there. We can't leave yet, not until it's done. The vehicle skidded to a stop, doors slamming. Voices shouted orders. Armed men spread out across the rocks, flashlights slicing through the dark. Keanu closed the laptop halfway, hiding the screen's glow. "Stay behind me," he whispered. Sandra's eyes filled with tears, fear, and defiance warring inside her. "Don't you dare do anything stupid." He smiled faintly. Too late for that. The first man appeared at the edge of the rocks. "Hand over the drive, Reeves," he barked. "This doesn't concern you anymore." Keanu stepped forward, his voice calm but unyielding. "You've built your power on silence and fear. It ends tonight." The man raised his weapon, but before he could act, the laptop chimed softly behind Keanu, the upload complete. A small notification blinked. "File distributed successfully." Sandra gasped, covering her mouth. "It's done." Keanu's eyes met hers, and for the first time in days, he smiled fully, genuinely. "We made it." The men realized too late. One shouted, "Stop them!" But the world had already changed. The truth was out, spreading faster than they could stop it. Hundreds of servers mirrored the files, thousands of downloads began. Their control was gone. Gunfire cracked through the air as Keanu pulled Sandra down behind the rocks. Shards of stone burst around them. "Go," he shouted. "Head toward the water," she refused. "I'm not leaving you. You have to," he said, his hand gripping hers tightly. "You've carried this pain long enough. Live free of it now." She shook her head, tears streaking down her face. "Not without you." Sirens echoed faintly in the distance, local police drawn by the gunfire. The attackers began to retreat, realizing their mission was pointless now. One of them shouted into a radio, "It's over." "Pull back." Keanu helped Sandra to her feet as the headlights vanished into the night. The waves below roared louder, salt spray misting the air. The danger had passed, but the silence left behind felt heavy, sacred. They walked back to the lighthouse, shoulders brushing, breaths unsteady. Inside, the laptop screen still glowed with a single message from the network: "Truth will find the light." Sandra collapsed into a chair, covering her face with trembling hands. "It's over," she whispered, her voice cracking. "It's finally over." Keanu knelt beside her, his voice gentle. "No, it's just beginning." She looked up, eyes red. "What do you mean?" "Now we live," he said. "Without lies, without guilt. We start again." She reached out, touching his hand. "You always find light, even in ruins." He smiled softly, his thumb brushing the back of her hand. "Maybe because I've seen too much darkness." The sun began to rise beyond the horizon, painting the sea in gold and rose. Keanu stood, stepping closer to the light spilling through the cracked window. Sandra joined him, her head resting lightly against his shoulder. The warmth of dawn felt like forgiveness. "You know," she said quietly, "the night you kissed my forehead, something changed. It wasn't about love, it was about peace. It made me feel seen again." He turned slightly, his voice low. "That kiss was a promise that no matter how far we fall, kindness will bring us back." Tears glimmered in her eyes, but this time they weren't from sorrow. She smiled, leaning gently against him as the morning wind swept through the open door. Below, the ocean reflected the first full light of day, endless and alive. The world would soon know everything: the lies, the truths, the courage of a few who refused to stay silent. Some would call them reckless, others heroes. But for Keanu and Sandra, none of that mattered. What mattered was that they had found peace not in victory but in honesty. As the waves crashed and the gulls cried above, Keanu whispered, "We kept our promise." Sandra closed her eyes, her hand still in his. And the world listened. The light grew brighter, washing away the last shadows of the night. For the first time in years, they were free not just from fear, but from the weight of silence that had once defined them. And somewhere far away, on countless screens across the globe, the files they released began to play, Michael's recordings, the truths he died for, the proof that kindness and courage could still stand against corruption. As the world watched, Keanu and Sandra simply stood by the sea, letting the wind carry away everything that had ever held them down. The storm was over, and dawn had finally arrived. Shadows of the past. The storm outside grew louder, wind pressing against the old glass windows as if trying to enter. Inside the beach house, candlelight danced over their faces, flickering between calm and fear. Keanu sat across from Sandra, his heart pounding but his voice quiet. "Start from the beginning," he said softly. "What really happened on that set?" Sandra took a long breath, eyes fixed on the rain outside as if she could see the memories there. "It was 15 years ago," she began. "We were filming a science fiction project in Nevada. The studio had built this massive underground stage, full of new tech. experimental lighting, synthetic fog, chemical effects. They said everything was safe, but we used to joke that the air felt too heavy to breathe. She paused. A few months after shooting Wrapped, one of the crew members got sick. Then another. No one connected it at first, but I remembered that same metallic smell in the air every day. It burned the back of your throat. Keanu leaned forward, every word hitting him like a slow revelation. You think whatever they used back then is still affecting you now? The doctors said the cells looked mutated, she whispered. Not like normal illness. Like something triggered it. I asked for the production safety records, but they were all missing. Then I got a call from an anonymous number telling me to stop asking questions. She rubbed her temples, exhausted. I ignored it at first. But then I found out one of the doctors who helped me disappeared 2 weeks later. No record, no contact, gone. Keanu's jaw tightened. And you think it's connected to the studio? She nodded. I don't think I know. Someone doesn't want the truth out. The candles flickered again, the flames bending as the wind pressed harder. For a brief second, the power lines outside flashed. The beach house went dark. Only the faint orange glow from the dying candles remained. Keanu stood and checked the window. A shadow moved near the dune line, too far to make out but close enough to sense. He stepped closer, his instincts sharp. We're not alone, he said quietly. Sandra's breath caught. What do you mean? He turned off the last candle and pulled the curtain shut. Someone's out there, watching. She grabbed his arm. They found us. He placed a steady hand over hers. Then we don't make it easy for them. For a few minutes, they sat in complete darkness, listening. The only sounds were the crashing waves and distant thunder. Then, faintly, came the crunch of footsteps on gravel, deliberate, slow. Approaching the house. Keanu's pulse quickened. He moved quietly toward the door, his movements calm but precise. He had lived through darker nights before, but this one felt heavier. The footsteps stopped. The silence was suffocating. He opened the door suddenly and stepped outside, the wind lashing his face. There was nothing, just an empty stretch of beach and rain whipping across the sand. No movement, no figure, only the echo of something that had been there moments before. He scanned the distance, then spotted a faint glow near the dunes, a small red light blinking. He moved toward it cautiously. When he reached the spot, he found it half buried in the sand. A tracking device. His stomach tightened. Someone had placed it near the house, probably hours ago. He returned inside, holding it out. They know where you are. They've known for a while. Sandra covered her mouth, her hands trembling. How long? Long enough to send that text, he replied. Long enough to scare you into running here. She sat down heavily, her voice breaking. What do we do? Keanu looked at her, his expression firm. We find the truth, and we make it public. You can't, she said sharply. They'll destroy you too. They already tried, he said quietly. The difference is, I'm still standing. There was a long pause, filled with the sound of the storm dying down outside. The candles had burned low, their light weak but persistent. Sandra looked up at him, tears in her eyes. Why are you doing this? She asked. You don't owe me anything, he gave a small smile. You once told me kindness isn't something you owe. It's something you give. She stared at him, her breath catching in her throat. For a moment, neither spoke. The air between them felt alive, charged with emotion and fear and something unspoken. Then Keanu took out his phone. I know someone who can help, he said. A journalist I trust. She's helped people expose things like this before. He dialed quickly, but before the call could connect, his signal dropped. He frowned and stepped toward the window, trying again. Still nothing. No signal here, he muttered. They're jamming it. Sandra stood, her face pale. They're close. The wind outside picked up again, but now it wasn't just wind. They could hear faint engine noises, a low hum from the road beyond the dunes. Keanu looked toward the back exit. We need to move. Now! They grabbed what they could, her phone charger, the paper note, the tracking device, and slipped out through the side door. Rain soaked them instantly, but neither cared. They moved quickly across the sand, the sound of the waves masking their footsteps. When they reached the edge of the coastal road, Keanu spotted headlights in the distance, approaching slowly. He pulled Sandra into the shadow of an old lifeguard tower. They crouched low, watching the vehicle pass. It was a black SUV, tinted windows, moving at a crawl as if scanning the area. No license plate visible. Sandra's hand trembled in his. "They're real," she whispered. "I know," he said quietly. "And now we're going to make sure the world knows too." As the SUV disappeared around the curve, they made their way to Keanu's car parked farther up the road. When they got inside, both sat in silence for a few moments, catching their breath. The windshield was fogged, rain tapping softly against it. Keanu started the engine. "Where are we going?" she asked. He looked straight ahead, somewhere safe, and then to someone who can tell us what they've been hiding all these years. Her voice was small. "And if they find us before that?" He glanced at her, his tone steady. "Then they'll learn what happens when you threaten someone I care about." The drive through the night felt endless. Somewhere behind them, a pair of headlights appeared again, distant at first, then closing in slowly, rhythmically, as if following their every turn. Sandra noticed it first. "They're still behind us." Keanu checked the mirror. His hands tightened on the wheel. "Yeah," he said quietly. "And they're not backing off." The rain blurred the world into streaks of silver and black as the chase began, their car slicing through the wet road like a heartbeat racing against time, and neither of them knew yet that what they were about to uncover would not only change their lives forever, but also expose something the world had been kept from seeing for decades. The truth in the dark. The highway stretched ahead like a river of black glass, slick with rain and faint reflections of streetlights. Keanu's hands stayed tight on the steering wheel, eyes sharp, every instinct alive. Behind them, the headlights still followed, steady, patient, never closing too much, never falling too far back. Whoever they were, they knew what they were doing. Sandra sat quietly in the passenger seat, her fingers gripping the seatbelt. She hadn't spoken in several minutes. Her eyes were distant, lost in a storm of fear and confusion. Finally, she whispered, "They won't stop, will they?" Keanu shook his head slightly. "Not until we make them." They drove in silence for a while longer before he took a sudden turn down a narrow side road that cut through the forest. The car jolted as the tires hit rough gravel. The headlights behind them followed for a moment, then vanished into the rain. He slowed down and turned off the headlights, coasting into the shadows beneath the trees. The only sounds were the ticking of the cooling engine and the rain dripping through branches. Sandra exhaled shakily. "How did you know that road was here?" "I didn't," he said. "I just trusted the quiet." She looked at him then, really looked, and saw in his calmness a kind of strength that steadied her. After a few minutes, Keanu restarted the car and drove toward an old wooden cabin at the edge of the forest. It was small and half-forgotten, a place he hadn't been in years. He parked behind it, hidden from the road, and killed the engine. "We can stay here tonight," he said. "No one knows this place." The cabin smelled of old wood and rain. Keanu lit a small fire in the stone hearth while Sandra wrapped herself in a blanket. She sat near the flames, her face soft in the glow, watching the sparks dance. "What if they find us?" she asked quietly. "Then they'll find two people who aren't running anymore," he replied. His tone wasn't angry. It was resolute, almost gentle. He had lost too many people to fear before. Not this time. After a long silence, Sandra reached into her bag and pulled out a small folder wrapped in brown paper. She handed it to him. "This," she said, "is why they want me silent." Keanu opened it carefully. Inside were a few faded photographs, old studio memos, and medical reports. One document stood out, a letter marked confidential, stamped with the production company's logo. He read it slowly, his eyes narrowing as the truth unfolded. It was an internal report from that old movie set, the one in Nevada. It confirmed everything Sandra had said and more. The chemical effects used had contained an experimental compound meant to create atmospheric haze. It was never approved for use around humans. The crew had been exposed for months, and buried in the final paragraph was something worse. The compound had been supplied by a private defense contractor, one that had been testing psychological response chemicals under the cover of film production. The goal had been to study emotional triggers in controlled visual environments. "They used you," Keanu whispered. "They used everyone." Sandra looked down, her voice trembling. "And when the side effects started showing, they hid it. I was one of the few who didn't get sick right away. I thought I was lucky." He set the papers down and stared at the fire. His reflection wavered in the orange light. "We can't keep this hidden. We have to show the world." "How?" she asked. "Every time someone tried, they disappeared." Keanu leaned forward, his eyes intense. "Then we don't do it quietly. We make it loud enough that they can't silence us both." She looked at him, uncertain but moved by his conviction. "You'd risk everything for this?" "It's not about risk," he said. "It's about truth. And about you." The words hung in the air. For a long moment, the fire was the only sound. Sandra's eyes filled with quiet emotion. She reached across the small space and took his hand. "You shouldn't have to carry this with me," she whispered. "You carried the weight of it alone for 15 years, he said softly. "It's my turn now." That night, while Sandra slept by the fire, Keanu stayed awake. He scanned through the documents again, his mind racing with possibilities. He knew one person who could help, the journalist he had mentioned earlier, Mia Callan. She had worked with him once on a charity project that exposed corruption in Hollywood accounting. She was fearless and connected. He stepped outside into the cold rain, moving far enough from the cabin to catch a faint phone signal. He sent her a short encrypted message. "Need your help. Bring protection. Meet me at dawn. Cabin 12, Blackridge Forest." The message sent successfully. He exhaled, the first hint of relief in hours. But as he slipped the phone back into his pocket, he noticed something, a faint light flickering through the trees far in the distance. Too steady to be lightning, too low to be a star. Someone was out there. He stayed completely still, watching the light move slowly closer, weaving between the trees. Whoever it was, they knew the forest well. He backed toward the cabin, careful not to make a sound. Inside, Sandra stirred. "What's wrong?" He pressed a finger to his lips. "We're not alone." The light vanished suddenly. The silence that followed was thicker than before, broken only by the whisper of rain on leaves. Keanu moved to the window, scanning the darkness. Nothing, then a sound. 3 faint taps against the cabin door. Deliberate, spaced apart. Tap, pause, tap, pause, tap. Sandra's hand clutched his arm. "Who is it?" she whispered. Keanu didn't answer. He stepped toward the door slowly, his mind racing. He opened it a fraction. The wind blew in, carrying a small folded note pinned to the wooden frame with a knife. He pulled it out, unfolded it under the light of the fire, and read, "You're not the only ones who know. Midnight. Pier 17. Come alone if you want the truth." The paper was wet. The handwriting rushed but clear. He looked up toward the forest again, but whoever had left it was gone. Sandra stood behind him, her voice unsteady. "What do we do?" He turned to her, eyes dark but determined. "We go," he said, "and we find out who else is playing this game." The fire crackled behind them, its light fading as the rain grew heavier outside. Both of them knew this was a trap, but it was also the only lead they had left. As midnight approached, Keanu and Sandra drove toward the coast once more. The pier waited like a shadow at the edge of the sea, waves crashing beneath its old wooden boards. Somewhere in that darkness, someone was waiting, someone who knew everything, and before the night was over, one of them would not make it back. The final light, the night was colder than before, the sea wild and restless. Mist hung low over the pier, twisting between the wooden pillars like smoke. Keanu parked the car a short distance away and cut the engine. The sound of waves swallowed everything else. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The only light came from a flickering street lamp near the entrance to the pier, casting long, broken shadows across the wet boards. Sandra looked at the water, her face pale but calm. "This feels wrong," she said softly. "It probably is," Keanu replied. "But if we walk away now, they win." She nodded slowly, her breath trembling in the cold air. "Then let's end it." They stepped onto the pier. Each plank creaked under their feet, echoing into the fog. Keanu's hand brushed the inside of his jacket where he had hidden the folder, the one with the evidence. It felt like carrying a live heartbeat. Halfway down, a figure appeared through the mist. A tall man in a dark coat, hands buried in his pockets, face shadowed. He stood under the broken light, its flicker revealing just enough to show he wasn't afraid. "You came," the man said. His voice was calm, almost tired. "Who are you?" Keanu asked. "Someone who used to believe the truth mattered," the man replied. "I worked for the studio. I ran the safety division on that project. I tried to stop them." Sandra stepped forward. "Then why hide? Why send threats?" The man's eyes shifted toward her. "Because when I tried to speak out, they came for me too. They shut everything down, erased names, buried the files. I've been running ever since." Keanu studied him carefully. "Then why call us here?" The man hesitated before pulling a small device from his coat pocket. "Because you were never supposed to find those documents. They'll come for you now. They already know where you are." A cold wind swept across the pier. Sandra's pulse quickened. "Who are they?" she asked. "The contractors," he said quietly. "The same group that funded the tests. They control several studios now, even the press. But there's a way to expose them. Everything is stored on a secure archive, one that only I can access. I can unlock it, but once I do, there's no going back." He glanced over his shoulder, eyes darting to the fog behind him. "They'll kill anyone who knows." Keanu stepped closer. "Then do it. Let the world see." The man looked at him for a long moment, then handed him a small flash drive. "This has the encryption key. The files are on a satellite drive that uploads to public servers once the code is entered. You have to do it far from here." He turned as if to leave, but before he could take another step, a sharp sound cracked through the air. A gunshot. The man staggered forward, clutching his side. Keanu caught him before he fell. Sandra gasped, dropping to her knees beside them. The man's eyes flickered. "They found us," he whispered. "Run!" Another shot rang out, splintering the wood beside them. Keanu pulled Sandra behind a support beam. The fog filled with flashes of light and the hiss of bullets tearing through the air. "Stay low," he whispered, his voice steady despite the chaos. "We have to help him," she said. "We can't. Not yet." The man lay motionless now, the flash drive still clutched in Keanu's hand. From the mist, dark figures emerged, 3, maybe 4, armed, moving in formation. They were trained. This wasn't about fear. This was cleanup. Keanu's heart pounded. He took Sandra's hand. "When I say run, you don't look back." She gripped his fingers tightly. "Not without you." He gave her a faint smile. "Then we run together." He waited until the next flash of lightning illuminated the fog, then moved. They sprinted down the pier as bullets ripped through the wood behind them. The sound of footsteps followed, heavy and fast. Halfway to the end of the pier, Keanu saw a small maintenance boat tied below. He jumped onto the railing, pulled the rope loose, and helped Sandra climb down. They pushed off just as another burst of gunfire echoed from above. The boat drifted into darkness. The pier faded into mist. For a while, they said nothing, only the sound of the ocean filling the silence. Keanu sat at the helm, breathing hard, clutching the flash drive. His knuckles were white, his eyes set on the horizon. Sandra sat beside him, shaking but unbroken. "What now?" "We finish what he started," he said quietly. By dawn, they reached a small marina on the far side of the bay. They left the boat and walked inland until they found an abandoned service station with an old computer inside. Keanu plugged in the flash drive and entered the code. A small progress bar appeared on the dusty screen. Uploading. Sandra watched as lines of text filled the screen. Names, reports, contracts, medical records, all the proof they needed. "Once it's up," Keanu said, "the truth will spread everywhere." The final bar reached 100%. The message flashed. Upload complete. For a long time, they just stared at the screen, realizing what they had done. Sandra turned to him. "We actually did it," he smiled faintly. "You did it!" "I just followed the light," she laughed softly, tears streaming down her face. "You never stop saying the right thing." He looked at her gently. "It's because you make me want to mean them." Outside, the sun began to rise, light breaking through the fading fog. It touched her face like forgiveness. The sound of the waves softened. For the first time in days, they both felt still. Hours later, news began to spread. Every major network, every feed, every headline, the files were everywhere. The truth about the cover-up, the experiments, the people they hurt. The world reacted with shock, outrage, and sorrow. Sandra's name appeared in every article, not as a victim, but as the woman who dared to speak when others couldn't. Keanu watched from the window of the small cabin they returned to. She stood outside in the morning light, her hair moving with the wind, her face calm. When she turned back toward him, he saw something he hadn't seen before, not fear, not pain, but peace. "Thank you," she said softly. He walked over, took her hand, and smiled. "No," he said quietly. "Thank you for reminding me what courage looks like." They stood there in silence, the ocean glittering behind them, two souls who had carried darkness and turned it into light. Weeks later, when the world had finally absorbed the truth, a photo appeared online. It showed Keanu and Sandra at a quiet charity event, smiling, surrounded by children holding candles. No red carpet, no press stage, just warmth. The internet called it the photo that healed the heartbreak. And in that moment, for millions watching across the world, Keanu Reeves and Sandra Bullock weren't just actors. They were symbols of something greater, proof that kindness, truth, and love, even in the darkest moments, still had the power to change everything.